Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. Today I'm back to talk to you again about unit studies because it seems like I've got never-ending information about them, and I just wanted to share with you the pros and cons of unit studies. So yesterday I shared a video with you about how to transition into a unit study style of learning, typically from a more schoolish way of learning, just because they are pretty different. I'm not going to get too much today into what a unit study actually is, because I have shared that in several videos, which I will link in the description box. But I will give you a short description in case you're not really too sure and don't feel like going back and watching all of those other videos first, which I do recommend that you at least watch the one called What is a Homeschool Unit Study? But if you don't want to do that, the short version of what a unit study is just taking one topic. For example, I'm going to give you an example of an Easter unit study that I did with my kids several years ago. You take that one topic and you learn about different things related to that topic that cover all of the subject areas, including language arts, math, science, social studies or history, art, sometimes music or gym. And just let me give you a quick example of some of the activities that I did in the Easter unit study so that you have a better idea of what sorts of things you would be doing with your kids in a unit study. Now, typically I will tell you that I don't separate everything into subjects when I plan out the unit studies for my kids, but I am going to separate what we did, some of the things that we did in the Easter unit study, so that you have a better idea of how to cover the subject areas when you're doing things that aren't necessarily sit down book learning that most people are used to. So for one day during this Easter unit study for language arts, my children did copy work. They did a copy work of a hot cross buns nursery rhyme. Then they rehearsed and performed an Easter puppet show that they wrote for their younger siblings. And then for a read aloud, they listened to the final chapter of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. For math, they prepared and baked hot cross buns. Yes, that does count as math because that involves fractions and measuring. For social studies, and it could also be history, they learned about the origin of the hot cross buns rhyme in England. And then for science, they prepared and baked hot cross buns. And you'll notice that it's the same thing as what I wrote down for math, but it also covers science because they learn about the effects of yeast. For art and creative expression, you might call that maybe drama or theater. They drew and colored a picture of a baker selling hot cross buns, and they performed the original puppet show that they wrote. And earlier in the week, they had already made the puppets in the puppet theater, so this was just like their presentation day. So as you can see, my kids got the subjects language arts, math, social studies, science, art, and creative expression all covered, and it was only for that Easter unit study. So instead of using a separate textbook or a separate lesson for every single one of those things, it was all connected together to that Easter unit study. And that is really what a unit study is. It's just learning about one topic, but covering all of the areas and just following those rabbit trails that you come across while you're learning those things. So now we're going to get to the pros of unit studies. So the pros, the first one is that unit studies are flexible and they can be used with children of multiple ages. The CONUS unit studies that I use are written for children from kindergarten to 8th grade. And the unit studies that I write myself are typically for children from kindergarten to 8th grade. And the nice thing about unit studies is that you can tweak the activities to fit the different ages of your child. So for example, back when my kids were doing a Greek mythology unit study, my 11-year-old wrote a report on vultures, and then my 10-year-old wrote a paragraph on vultures, and then my 8-year-old wrote a list of facts about vultures. So as you can see, you can take a similar activity, but you can change it up to meet the needs of your children and their different age levels. So yes, they are multi-level, unit studies are. You just have to learn how to tweak it and just how to change things around so that they can fit the individual levels that your kids are at. So The second pro of unit studies is that they're a great way to include your child's interests. And I talk to you all the time about how important it is to try to do things that your kids are interested in, or to get their input about the things that they would like to learn about. When you are using a textbook approach, that can be tough because you're pretty much just following whatever comes next in the textbook. When it comes to unit studies, though, you can easily incorporate their interest into that unit study. Their interest can be the unit study. So if they have a particular interest in, we'll just say, pandas, they can, you can take them to the library. You can get a bunch of books out about pandas. You can come home. They can read the books about pandas. You can read it with them. You could have them do copy work. You could have them write about pandas. You could have them draw pictures of pandas. Or my kids actually, they did learn about pandas at one point, and they made like a panda out of like a plate. It was really cute, and they made it into like a puppet with a craft stick. They can watch documentaries about pandas. You can find out if there are any maybe zoos around you that have pandas, and if they do, you can go there and you can visit. So as you can see, you can stretch out all of the different topics that come just from learning about pandas. And also it's a great way for them to learn about the endangered species list as well. So yes, that's a definite pro. It's a great way. It's an easy way to incorporate your child's interest into what they're doing for school. And so the third pro that I wrote down today is just that it is much easier for them to retain learning in a unit study approach. Since the unit study approach is more holistic, meaning that everything is connected, it's very easy for them to remember things in comparison with when they are learning things either out of a textbook or off of a PowerPoint or just kind of worksheets, and everything is usually disconnected. You know, if you're doing textbooks, since they have all these different textbooks, every time they start a new subject, it's typically about something different, you know, so they might be learning about, and I mentioned this yesterday, the Civil War in history, and then tundras in science. And then when they're learning maybe language arts, they might be learning just about like predicate adjectives and predicate nominatives, and there's no way to really tie it together to what they've been doing in everything else. And unit studies really do tie everything together. When you do tie those things together and make those connections, since your kids have been learning about that one topic for a lot of unit studies will last a few weeks, and they're doing this, you know, a good portion of your homeschool day, they are going to remember those things because everything was linked to that one thing. So now there are some cons to unit studies, and I'm going to be honest about this. So first of all, they do take more prep time than a typical textbook driven approach. With a textbook, you know, your kids open up the book and then they do whatever lesson came next or whatever the assignment was for that day. Although I do have to say that it does take time to correct those things later. So it pays off in the end, because with unit studies, you don't really have so much correcting to do that you might have had to do with a textbook. But yeah, it really does take longer to plan a unit study, because, you know, you do have to go to the library to collect, you know, some books about it. You have to maybe look up and see if there are any good videos on YouTube or whatever app you might use for them to watch things on. So you have to come up with ideas, ways to integrate your unit study into activities. The good thing about that, though, is that you really can make that as involved or pretty simple as however fits you. You know, like if you're someone who's really crafty and is really gung-ho about doing these sorts of things, then, you know, have at it. Go there and plan all kinds of crafts, and the planning probably won't bother you. If you're like me, though, I'm not very crafty, and I really like things simple. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I have so many kids, so it's kind of necessity that I have to keep things simple. And so if you do like simplicity, you can plan your unit studies in a more simple way too. You don't have to do all of those intricate crafts. You don't have to do projects that are going to take 6 hours for one day. It really is, again, just learning how to fit these things to fit your lifestyle. So a second con is that it can be tempting to overdo it with unit studies, and I'm talking time-wise. So when you're planning out these unit studies, and I'm speaking from experience here, most of the things that I talk about here are from experience, so I'm hoping to help you with this. it can be fun to like start writing down the unit studies and all the activities that you're doing. And as you're writing these activities down that your kids are going to be doing, you might have it running through your mind for how it's going to look and how excited they're going to be. And you just, you get all gung ho about it. So sometimes you might plan too many things for one day, and before you know it, you've got so many activities planned for one day that if you would actually try to do it, it would be like a 12-hour school day. So you really have to be careful, and you have to know your limits when it comes to planning out unit studies. A helpful thing is to know how many unit study activities your kids can actually handle. There was a time many years ago when I used to try to do like 4 unit study activities every day, in addition to their language arts and math and read aloud. And I noticed that my kids were not really able to handle 4 activities every day. It was just too overstimulating for them. So what I eventually ended up doing was we are down to 2 unit study activities every day, in addition to the read aloud and the math and the other things that they do. So you really have to know what you and your kids can handle. And if you at least give yourself those little guidelines of how many activities to stick to, that is very helpful. The third con is that it can be hard to let go when your kids lose interest in a topic, but you are still like really enthralled. We've already been studying things that I was into just as much as my kids, but then over time, their interest started to wane, and I still wanted to know all about it. So yeah, sometimes it can be hard to kind of like pull back and to realize that you can overdo things. Even if it's a topic that your kids picked, one of their own interests, if you overdo it, they will lose interest. And that's not really something that you want to do when your child does have a genuine interest in something. So you really have to gauge their interest in things. Despite how you might feel about it, despite how badly you might want to continue on, just remember that if your kids really aren't into it anymore and their heart isn't into it, chances are they're not going to retain much anyway. And if you really want to know more about it, you can always, look it up later on when you're not doing school with your kids. So anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can possibly leave one here or over on Instagram or on my YouTube community page. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.